Before we jump into this podcast, let's just have a first word from our sponsors, NordVPN, the fastest VPN in the world and an absolute essential travelling companion. You can use NordVPN on 10 devices with just one account, easily switching your virtual location to access apps and websites in other countries. But if you're out of the country, make sure that you've got NordVPN to be able to use your subscriptions and watch the live sport that you might miss. If you're at home, use it to see if you can save money with products that might be cheaper in another region. Go to nordvpn.com/Manchester to get 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. The link is also in the podcast description. Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston. I'm joined, of course, by Samuel Luckhurst. It's Friday morning. It's press conference day ahead of the Manchester derby, but we're going to record this quick little podcast and get into the latest transfer news and, of course, look ahead to the big game on Sunday at the Etihad. To begin with, Samuel, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I've found some light, some natural light, like United have got at Carrington after this camera let me down at my actual desk. But my microphone stand is very unconventional. My son's godmother, bless her, she's great when she brings presents around, but she forgot to bring them around at Christmas. So I've just got Munchosaurus Mayhem and Thomas the Tank Engine toy boxes stacked on each other to give me a secure place for my microphone. So it's unconventional, but at least people can see me if they are indeed watching this on YouTube.
It's a big improvement because you were in the darkness when we last recorded, weren't you? So people can actually see your face reactions when you react to certain things.
Read into that what you will. I'm in the dark. Well, there's
a metaphor.
Yeah.
We'll start with Andrew Onana, Samuel. That's the logical place to start. Obviously, his move to Trabzonspor was confirmed last night around 8 o'clock. It was on the cards immediately when St. Lomans came into the club. It's a straight loan. They will pay for his entire wages throughout this season. What's your snap verdict, your initial reaction to the move?
Unfortunately, this is the start of one's career going into decline. He's not even gone to one of the eminent clubs in Turkey. Normally it's Galatasaray or Fenerbahce. Fenerbahce had no interest in him before Jose Mourinho was sacked, and of course they did end up going for a Manchester-based goalkeeper who's been phased out in Ederson, who has clearly had a much more successful time in England and is arguably the greatest keeper that Manchester City have had, just by virtue of the success they had while he was there for 8 years. But with Onana, I was told quite quickly after the Lamans deal was done, and it might even have been before it, that the prospect of 4 senior goalkeepers was a nonsense. That was the word used to me, and the other word was that it would be a problem. And it's not a problem anymore because United have they've whittled it back down to 3 keepers. Tom Heaton, unfortunately for him, I don't think he's ever going to get a kick again for United. Just going off Ruben Amorim's response to my question after the Arsenal game and the fact that he's actually not played in 2.5 years and he turns 40 in April. And with Onana, clearly, I think Amorim's opinion of him has evolved over time, because very, very senior figures at United back in May, towards the end of last season, were saying that a goalkeeper wasn't the priority. And I think that was apparent throughout the whole summer transfer window, in that they invested more than £200 million on the attack. That was completely logical after what happened last season. But I think most supporters felt that a new goalkeeper, at the very least, not necessarily an outright number one, was required. And in the end, they did go for the profile of keeper that I was kind of told that they were going to go for back in January. But in the end, it's someone to come in who is not going to compete with Onana. They're going to compete with Altay Bayındır, which, if I'm a United fan, I'd feel quite uneasy about. I mean, while Onana was there, they clearly felt uneasy about him being in goal, because I would say over the course of 2 seasons, he conceded at least 24 savable or preventable goals, which, of course, never reflects well on a goalkeeper. And it really, are they in a much of a better place with Lamans and Bayındır? We discussed it before. I'd have kept Onana around just for just for the experience. And it was always going to be easier to get rid of Bayindir. And this is what I didn't quite understand. I know, of course, Onana's hamstring injury in July had a bearing and certainly influenced some of the decision making that went on there. But really, before last season ended, somebody should have been sitting down with Altay Bayindir and saying to him that thanks for what you've done over the 2 years. Thanks for the Arsenal game in the FA Cup, but you can leave this summer and go and find yourself a new club. This is still a goalkeeper who, although he's started in every Premier League game for United this season, he's still warming the bench for Turkey in their World Cup qualifiers, which was the case earlier this month. So it's not as though he's this. It's not like he's got unknown qualities or he's a hidden gem or he's a late bloomer. He's not. I would be amazed if Manchester United amount to a successful side with him in goal. And with Lamens, he was literally an unknown quantity to pretty much everyone outside Belgium until about a month ago, if that. And it was interesting when that deal was finally concluded. And United, of course, it's good for us, it's useful for us, and it informs our view of a player. And certainly one of the most memorable occasions I had of that was speaking to Ten Hag off the record about Rasmus Højlund. And I came away from it thinking, crikey, maybe they've actually got a good player there. They've got a good striker. Maybe he'll surprise us. But United with Lamens, all of a sudden, there's now such a thing as a top 10 European league. It's not the big 5 European leagues. It's a top 10 European league, which, let's face it, does not count for much whatsoever. But it was stats, metrics, what he did is, I can't remember, was it shots to save ratio in the top 10?
Some poor shot XG as well,
leagues.
Which you would have frowned at.
Yeah, progressive passes. It's very clear that this is another data-driven signing. But I can tell, nobody should be able to tell Lamens this himself. He should know himself. Nothing can prepare you for going in net as Manchester United goalkeeper. Nothing is going to prepare him for it. The metrics, the data that he accrued playing for Royal Antwerp are absolutely moot. Playing in goal for Manchester United is one of the most scrutinised positions in football. And I suspect he will not start this weekend. This is going to be probably a season of one of acclimatisation for him. That said, you look at the guy who's in front of him and he drops dollies every other week, every month. So there is a chance, I think, that he will get his chance over the course of the season, even though United have not got a cup game until January. But this is the problem with the dynamic. This is such a huge season for United. They've got such a huge opportunity to get back into the Champions League. And I would have felt better, I would have felt slightly more at ease as a United fan if Onana was in goal, shielded by a pretty good roster of centre-backs. Even an auxiliary centre-back at the moment, Luke Shaw, has had quite a decent start to the season. We've seen Nusa Mazraoui play there. He can play well there as well. Maguire's had a very good couple of years. Lisandro Martinez, okay, he's injured still, but when he's in the team, certainly at the start of the calendar year, I thought he was really making headway after a poor first half of the season. Lenny Oro has had a very good calendar year. Matthias de Ligt has found form and looks, he looks more like his old self at Ajax, and has done so in the past 6 months, I would say. So they actually look pretty, in pretty good shape there. So that should always give you a bit of ease in terms of you've got that solid shield to protect a goalkeeper. And yes, sometimes you can't do anything about it. And ultimately, Onana was his own worst enemy, because we saw what happened at Grimsby. We didn't have monitors in that press box. We didn't need them. When the first goal went in, we all knew he should have kept that out. When the second goal went in, we knew it was his fault. And unfortunately for him also, the match goes had turned against him. He got a lot of stick that night. He got booed. We couldn't quite pick it up because it was such a raucous atmosphere in that main stand. But speak to my dad afterwards, he said that the booing was audible on television. Last season, Onana was irking the supporters by delaying restarts, and their mood was not improved by him urging them to relax, to calm down. And that really jarred with what he told us at UCLA in pre-season when he said, be prepared, I'm going to take risks. And this was a guy who came in with, he was famed for his distribution, but that deserted him last season. And really, I go back. I've done a piece on it as a follow-up, really, to the story I did this morning on kind of like Onana's time at United. But on the day of the Lyon away leg, which was back in April, and there was obviously quite an eventful build up to it, in that Onana had told a few of us in the mix zone at Old Trafford that United are way better than Lyon. And he didn't say it in a disparaging way, he just said it in a bullish, confident way. But of course, it elicited that reply from Nemanja Matic at the Lyon pre-match press conference. And so on the day of the game, whilst I was just strolling around with a few colleagues in Lyon, I got a voice note from a contact on WhatsApp who said, if United win, address Onana with this phrase. It was an Italian phrase, and he'll stop, because he's prepared to do something funny if United win. Unfortunately, he reserved his comedy for his performance that evening when he was at fault for both of Lyon's goals, and he never really recovered from that week. I don't think. He was taken out the firing line for the weekend, shellacking at Newcastle. Now Amorim has pretty much fired him.
If we break the 2 seasons down, his first 2 seasons at the club, it's actually really interesting because he made a really bad start. Mistakes in the Champions League group stage. He was shocking, wasn't he, in that group stage? Galatasaray, Bayern Munich, allowing real stinkers into the back of the net. Then in December 2023, United drew 0-0 against Liverpool. He was the first goalkeeper at that stage of that season to keep a clean sheet at Anfield, and it was a pretty good performance. And I felt like he kind of turned the corner there.
That was I'd say that was...
It was a defensive performance.
Game, Johnny Evans, Rafael Varane Varane was man of the match, and Johnny Evans turned up.
Collectively, it was a brilliant defensive performance, wasn't it? I agree. The defenders were exceptional.
I know you
was good as well.
Pitched him as player of the year for 2020.
Well, that's what I'm about to come to. But then he ends his first season strongly, and he does. And he starts the last season strongly as well. And he made that double save against Crystal Palace. We were both there. It was fantastic in September 2024. He kind of followed that up against Fenerbahce with another brilliant double save. He won the Premier League Save of the Month award for his stop against Palace. So there was that moment when you're starting to think, right, well, he's starting to deliver now. We're actually starting to see the goalkeeper who we thought United were signing. And I remember when we were down at Portman Road for Amorim's first game against Ipswich, United fans sung his name for the first time. And that wasn't that long ago. That was a year ago, almost 12 months ago. Then it probably all started to go downhill. And you've made this point multiple times, Samuel, against Arsenal, didn't it? Where he conceded from 2 corners, then mistakes against Forest, Pilsen, and of course, Lyon happens in April. So was it last year, do you think that turning point was? Last winter? Because for me, and we've laughed at this now because it is very funny in hindsight, but he had a very good 2024 up until that moment.
It was a decent 2024. I wouldn't necessarily go as far as to say it was very good, but there's obviously, I'm sure a lot of fans have seen online this montage of his mistakes. It's got about, I think last I saw this morning, it's got 2.2 million views. Some of them, including it, are not mistakes. It's harsh, but there are some mistakes that the creator of the video has forgotten about and not edited into it. And as I said earlier, it's not mistakes necessarily. It's there are goals that he could have prevented, not obvious errors, but goals that shouldn't be allowed in. I mean, there are a few times where he got beaten at his near post, and that Arsenal game, which was a week or two into Amorim's tenure, I think it was, and United just beaten Everton 4-0 at home. And there was this premature sense that, it was lift-off under Amorim, which I didn't buy, because Everton were actually pretty good in the first half hour, and it was 0-0. And then in the next half hour, United just scored all 4 of their goals. And then the final half hour, it was just a procession because the game was won, and that was that. But Arsenal, like, if you want to cut Onana some slack, Arsenal have cornered just about every team that they've come up against. But it was how meek he was, and that he wasn't looking to get the ball. And I can understand sometimes that goalkeepers, they want to keep their powder dry because they don't want to be humiliated, and so they'll stay on their line. I go back to when it used to be the De Gea Dean Henderson contest in that 2021 season. I think it was in April. It was the day of the Super League launch. United played Burnley at home, and it was at the time when Henderson was the number 1 goalkeeper in the Premier League. and there was a ball that was delivered in and it was dropping just inside the penalty area, and Henderson, he should have kept his powder dry, but he came to try and get it, and Chris Wood beat into it, scored. Fortunately for Henderson, he was flagged offside. But I was told the reason Henderson went after that ball was because in his mind, he knows that David De Gea has got this reputation for being rooted to his line. So he wants to show the world, I'm the absolute opposite. I will come off my line, I'll try and claim the ball, when at times he's got to keep his powder dry. And that's where there's a bit of naivety and a lack of experience on the part of throughout that time, he'd have been a relatively young goalkeeper in the Manchester United first team. But Onana he did not arrive at United at a young age. He was fully established. He played for big clubs, come through Barcelona's academy, Ajax, big club, Inter Milan, a big club. He should be more authoritative at corners. But clearly, as we saw at Grimsby, it is a problem for him. But that was, if you can cut him some slack for that, you couldn't cut him some slack for what happened a few days later against Nottingham Forest with the Gibbs-White shot, which was just an unfathomable error. And after that, it got worse. I think Forest's winning goal that day was a weird one as well, where I think Onana, the header came, it was across the far post, wasn't it? Header from Wood, I think, might have been Chris Wood. And Onana leaves it, and it seems like Martinez leaves it, and it seems like De Ligt leaves it, and then it just almost trickles in, and Forest end up winning the game 3-2. And as you said later that month, it's the Pilsen, which was a very different era with his poor distribution, not seeing the danger, and then Wolves on Boxing Day, where he conceded straight from a corner, which is something that Bayern has a problem with. And people who know Onana, they were not blind to it. They at that time they were quite relaxed. I think is maybe an overstatement, but they were pretty phlegmatic about it. It was, he probably had a good start to the season, good third to the season, but then December was difficult, and then there was the Brighton error as well, which secured their victory in mid-January. But they still felt as though this was quite a condensed period, and maybe just an aberration. He'd come out the other side and he'd be okay, but he wasn't, because as I said earlier, the Lyon game in particular was a real bad one because of the build up to it, what he said. And those of us who've spoken to him, and obviously you spoke to him that time at Brighton, he had a lot of goodwill with us because he was really likable, he was really warm, he was a good character, he was a good conversationalist. There was a reason why United would put him up in mix zones. He wasn't part of that leadership group, but he was a senior player, and he could convey the message from the dressing room and articulate it in the appropriate way. But obviously, that doesn't count for much when you're dropping dollies every week. And when you look at the sheer number of mistakes he made over that 2-year period, it was always going to be difficult to survive that. But I still maintain the way that goalkeeping situation has been managed by Amrim it's just been wrong. It's been a mistake. He should have started the season with Onana. If Onana was making errors in league games, fair enough, drop him, put Bayern in. We said last season it got to a point where it was almost worth giving Bayern a go in league games, but in the end it was more of a rotational exercise. But now all they've succeeded in doing, and look, it's much of a muchness whether you keep Onana or whether you go into the season without Onana. But nobody knows who Manchester United's number one is. Bayern's got the number one on the back of his shirt, but nobody is ever going. I'm pretty confident that nobody is ever going to look at him and think, yeah, you're United's number one, or you should be United's number one. He shouldn't be. There's nothing against him. It's just that he's not good enough, and he's demonstrated that over the course of his. He must have played about 13 games now for United, and he must have made mistakes in probably at least half of them, maybe a little bit more.
You're right to say that he always did come across well. Spoke to him after that Selhurst Park game as well, and after his debut, actually, when he again made the howl. I was very lucky to get away with it. Wolves have received an apology, didn't they? Because that was a blatant penalty. It was interesting because Onana didn't really come out and recognise that, which I thought was he could have came out and said, yes, it was a penalty, but he played it down and said it wasn't, kind of thing. But he did front up after the Bayern Munich game, which I thought was impressive a few months later. Do you remember he put his hand up and requested to speak, I think to TNT, to kind of say, look, it's my fault we've lost tonight. And fans respected him for taking responsibility. But unfortunately, he just hasn't cut these errors out. And that's what has cost him his career in Manchester. And it's funny, isn't it? You see the reports kind of pointing out that he will receive a pay rise in Turkey, partly because of their low tax rate. And it's clearly sources close to the player clutching at straws for positives, because this is not a positive move. I mean, he was playing in Turkey in the Champions League final in 2023. Now, 2 years later, he's playing for, as you said, a club who isn't even a traditional Turkish powerhouse, is it? Moving on then, we obviously agreed it's the right decision to move him on. We probably would have been in the Buendia camp, but we're left with Buendia and Lomans as the choices for the derby. The logical thing, I guess, as you've just said before, would probably be to start Buendia. I would probably be in the Lomans camp though, Samuel. I just think when I watch Buendia corners, you need to pop some Gaviscon, don't you? He gives you a heart attack.
I would be in the Tom Heaton camp. Still, I know I'm laughing about it, but seriously, I would probably feel better off with him in goal this weekend than a novice who was I think Belgium picked 4 goalkeepers in their squad recently, and he wasn't one of them. Buendia is Buendia. We've seen enough of him. Maybe he'll have he'll have a performance akin to the FA Cup third round at Arsenal. Well, certainly the second hour of it, the first hour was not particularly good for him at all that evening. But it's just not a good position to be in. And this is the problem United have, in that they're going to go into every game for a good while, I think, and people are going to think or wonder, who's the goalkeeper going to be?
It's the one position that you don't want uncertainty, isn't it?
No, exactly. And look, the club of course they've botched this before, and you go back to the first season after Schmeichel, and Mark Bosnich arrives on a free, and Sir Alex Ferguson he's someone who can be economical with the truth or likes a bit of revisionism, but he was always adamant that Bosnich was not his choice. He was signed over his head, which I find a bit hard to believe. I know Ferguson wasn't there for his unveiling. It was Martin Edwards who was present at Old Trafford and giving Bosnich the goalkeeper jersey and the scarf to hold aloft to the photographers there. But really, then but Bosnich was an interesting one because he had this reputation of being a really good shot stopper, but his kicking, even back then in the Premier League, his kicking was infamously bad, and it was apparent on his debut, his Premier League debut, certainly at Goodison Park, that it was going to be a problem. And about a month into that season, United ended up signing Massimo Taibbi from Regina, which obviously everyone just knows him for the Matutissier goal, and he played, I think it was 4 games. Raymond van der Gaal had been at the club for a couple of years, and he must have played close to 24 games, I'd say, that season off the top of my head. So they had 3 senior goalkeepers. Bosnich was injury prone, Taibbi was a dud, van der Gaal was this relatively steady pair of hands, but he had the odd error that season. Bordeaux away springs to mind, where he did drop a pretty routine shot that went through his hands and into the back of the net. But that dynamic it's never, I just don't think it's ever worked at any point where you've got 2 clear number 1 goalkeepers. And in the case of Taibbi, I think Ferguson at the time was keen to stress that he was very much his man. Ferguson said, yeah, Italy produced the best goalkeepers in the world. We're getting an Italian goalkeeper, which at that time there was probably merit in it as well, given some of the Italian keepers that Ferguson would have seen in his lifetime, and that were in the national squad at that time as well. So there was a bit of, I suppose he was almost, wouldn't have been the first time he was at loggerheads with Martin Edwards, but it was almost as if Edwards had his man in Bosnich, Ferguson had his man in Taibbi, but Taibbi didn't last very long at all. You go to the 04-05 season, Roy Cowell and Tim Howard were alternating far too often. It wasn't helping anyone. And Ferguson knocked it on the head by signing a 35-year-old Edwin van der Sar. And for 6 years, United had a clear and obvious, undeniable number 1 who helped make them a very successful team again. And David De Gea was a genuinely great goalkeeper who probably deserved to have more success at United over the course of his 12 years at the club. But the position, I would be surprised if at any point this season we're not looking at the goalkeeper situation thinking, yeah, that's boxed off for the time being. That's okay. If Lomans turns out to be this rough diamond who really adapts well to the Premier League and looks at ease and establishes himself quite quickly, they'll have done terrific business. But it's such a tough ask that to go from a club that were United's original feeder club and to go to United at this stage, given the issues they've had with two very senior goalkeepers already this season, and to really make that position his own, it's an onerous task. But good luck to him. He must have belief in himself to obviously take on the opportunity. And we've obviously discussed in recent weeks or touched upon some of the younger keepers United have produced through their academy in Radik Vitek and Eli Harrison. Vitek is an interesting one because he's gone on loan to the Championship, which the unspoken rule at United is if a player goes on loan to the Championship, they think he's got half a chance of coming back, or better than half a chance of coming back and establishing himself in the first team squad. And he's made a good start at Bristol City. And when they won the FA Youth Cup in 2022, Vitek made a bad error for Nottingham Forest's goal that night. And when you see it at the time, you think, how's this gonna go for this young lad now? Because it's a high profile error. Fortunately, United won the game, so it's not as memorable as it could have been. But they were 1-0 up at the time. That made it 1-1. He has done terrifically well to have overcome that error and to have established himself as a pretty good goalkeeper on loan, to the point that he's now playing on loan in England's second tier, in frankly one of the most exciting leagues in Europe. So that says a lot about his character. And I will say again, and I know I can sound like a Luddite, you learn a lot more from how a goalkeeper reacts to a mistake like that than you do from some nonsense about progressive passes against Club Brugge or Anderlecht or other Belgian clubs nobody has heard of.
Wait till you learn that Vitek has the most progressive passes in the Championship.
Well, I'm sure
I'm making that up. It's probably pie in the sky. No, he's clearly got a bright future, doesn't he, Vitek? And you're right.
He's got something about him.
Yes, he definitely does. Those loans before Bristol as well would have helped him a lot. Successful spell at Accrington and at Linz as Austria as well. So it's great to see him doing well and making a good start. How many more changes would you make then, Samuel, from the Burnley game? It was really important that United got that win. It went down to the last seconds of the match with Bruno Fernandes converting a penalty. But United were very good in the first half. They could have had the game wrapped up. It could have been maybe 3-0 if they'd actually taken their chances. But how many times did we say that last season? Of course, there's a caveat. There could be some injuries. Kuna and Mason Mount are forced off. We are recording this podcast, again, I will stress, on Friday morning. So by the time you're listening to this, you'll have probably the clear picture. And then Diogo Dalot as well has withdrawn from Portugal during the break. But Dalot always tends to be fit, doesn't he? And it was just a minor muscle problem. So I expect him to be involved.
Well, it does kind of segue on something more interesting than the team news, given that the press conference hasn't been held yet, which is that United's academy run dating back to 1937, 4,000 or so matches. I think it's over 4,300 now. It does feel like that's under some real threat now, and it would have been under possibly immediate threat had Kobbie Mainoo got his way and left on loan. Because looking at this first team squad now, there are 4 academy players. You've got Tom Heaton, who probably won't play for United again and is 39 years of age. You've got Tyler Fredrickson, who probably won't play for United again after what happened at Grimsby, unfortunately for him. Mainoo, who is an important player, and Chido Obi, who's not had a kick this season. And there's nothing to write home about that. It's not controversial that he's not been in the squads at all whatsoever. He's a 17-year-old who is at the back of the queue for the strikers, and United were always going to sign the striker this summer. But if United have everyone fit and then say Mainoo is suspended or injured, Amrim's got a decision to make there, because the logical decision would be to put someone into the squad who's a senior figure, who makes it for a more rounded match day squad, whether they're a defender or a midfielder, and they're not an academy player. It would be almost tokenism to put Tom Heaton on the bench, which Amrim probably would do. And it would almost feel like a cop-out if that was to happen. Because, I mean, I've said this before, I think it should be a written rule for domestic matches that you cannot put two goalkeepers on the bench. I find it quite insulting that managers are allowed to do it, and that managers do that. Ten Hag did it. Amrim has done it as well. I don't see why you wouldn't want to have a young lad from the academy, an outfield player, bring him over to the first team building, put him in that elite player development changing room, whatever you want to call it, and give him the experience of going through the match day routine of what it's like to play for Manchester United, rather than just having someone on the bench you're never ever going to turn to. But with Mainu, I mean, this is the interesting thing. He's going to be probably the only Mancunian in the United squad this weekend, quite possibly. And if Mount and Cunha are both out, then I think logically Mainu, somehow you have to put him in the team, most likely as one of the two number 10s. But this is a lad who, you know, in terms of his as an academy member, he's won the Youth Cup, he won the FA Cup final for United, scoring against City in the final. He's from Stockport, which is a City stronghold. It's quite remarkable how drastically things have changed from that final in May 2024, to the point where, you know, we're talking about him almost fretting about his future at United, and the knock-on effect of this long academy run of a homegrown player being in the squad for more than 4,300 games, dating back to 1937. And there have been times in recent years where I think, certainly at the start of the Van Gaal reign, I think it might have been Ollie Holt who did a piece on it, suggesting that it was under threat because United spent big that summer on Di Maria, Herrera, Falcao came in as well. But of course, Van Gaal gave academy debuts out left, right, and centre, and he over-promoted some of them to the point that it was never under threat. And there's always been an established academy player in the squad since then. I mean, Rashford obviously was there from 2016 until late last year. Garnacho felt like he was always going to be a mainstay. He never got injured after that tackle from Kyle Walker-Peters against Southampton about 2.5 years ago. That was the last time he ever got injured. His durability was remarkable. And Mainu has been an integral player for United, but it doesn't feel he's as integral now because he can't get in the team. So it's an interesting time with United, because I wouldn't say it's an identity crisis, but it does feel like their identity is changing. They play with the back three. They don't play with conventional wingers. And as mythical as the United way is, they are a club renowned for producing, developing wingers, probably going back a century. You go all the way back to Billy Meredith, to the start of the 20th century. He was one of the original wing wonders, I suppose, that people at United or United historians speak about. And they're looking to move, obviously not move that far, but a new stadium as well. That's another change of identity if they can do that. I think 2030 is looking rather fanciful still for their estimated opening date for a new Old Trafford. But all these things, you look at it and you think, it doesn't really sit easily with me, and they're not getting the results that are distracting people and distracting supporters from those potential developments. So that's, it's something that I thought of just after the transfer window closed. Like, crikey, you look at that United squad, and really the only academy player who's got a chance of getting a kick this weekend is Mainu. And I'm sure that Amrim will keep that run going along, but it might be a cop-out here and there. It might be just putting Tom Heaton on the bench with another keeper, or putting Tyler Fredrickson in because there's a defender injured. But it's certainly, it feels like it's more under threat now than it ever has been before in my lifetime.
You don't want to be the manager or head coach in this case who's responsible for breaking that record there, I don't think. It's a wonderful, wonderful piece of history to have, and hopefully it continues. This weekend is a huge opportunity, Samuel. City were very impressive on the opening day against Wolves, 4-0. I think everyone went a bit overboard. Now we've got the benefit of hindsight about their title credentials. But they really need to get themselves back on track against United because they've suffered 2 defeats since then in the Premier League. They've obviously splashed more money as usual in the transfer window. But from a United perspective, you look at City and they're very gettable. Defensively, they're not what they used to be. The midfield isn't as impressive. And even going forward, if you contain Haaland, you think you can kind of stifle them. So United secured a fantastic result in December, the 2-1, thanks to Ahmad's heroics. It was a crap game, wasn't it, Old Trafford in April, the 0-0. But this is a massive opportunity here to get the season up and running after the international break with a big win.
Well, it's happened before as well, where there's an international break and then the first game back is a Manchester derby, which, I mean, the fixture computer, let's face it, it's not random. There's a reason why these big games are thrown up after people have been starved of domestic football, or at least top flight domestic football in England for a fortnight. And it's such a curious derby because both teams are in, I hate using the word, but there is a transitional feel about them, in that United haven't probably changed their squad as much as they should have or could have from last season. They did get players out the door belatedly on deadline day, but it does feel quite familiar to the squad that finished 15th last season. City look very, very different now compared to in years gone by, and you look at the lineup of their last match at Brighton, and there is a lot of it does feel like it's more revolution than evolution that's going on there. There are a lot of new faces that have arrived this calendar year. They've signed 2 goalkeepers alone this summer transfer window. I imagine James Trafford will continue in net this weekend, but if I were him, I would probably be.
I think you'd put Donnarumma straight in.
But he's not. He's only just arrived, isn't he? He's not trained with them. This is just me trying to look at it through if it's all possible, the prism of Pep Guardiola, which I don't think would necessarily be advisable.
You'd be scratching your head in a second.
By his head, yeah, you would be a very agitated individual, but a genius nonetheless. But it just, you look at City and that fear factor has undeniably gone, and not winning a trophy last season was always going to ensure that. But you go through the squad, and it is at the moment it does feel a little bit like a mishmash. They've clearly not gelled. They had a very good opening win against Wolves, but as we all knew at the time, it was Wolves. Wolves are going to struggle again. This might be the season where they do finally fall through the trapdoor and they can't cling on. But United didn't actually lose to City last season across 3 games. The Community Shield was decided on a penalty shootout with Jadon Sancho, of course, being one of the penalty takers not to convert. The finale at the Etihad was obviously extremely uplifting for United, scoring 2 late goals to win at City again. And there were some progressive strides in that rather drab goalless draw at Old Trafford in February. So I think United will be, they should be quietly confident, because City are not in a good state. But then again, who's to say that City won't just turn it on and get an early goal and dole out another hammering to United, as they have done on a number of occasions under Guardiola. So it just feels like it's a really peculiar derby, because these games have been a lot bigger in recent years, and that's a very obvious statement. Of course, there were 2 FA Cup finals between the teams, and it did feel like they were 2 of the most consequential FA Cup finals in decades, given what was riding on them for both sides. In 2023, City were going for the treble. United had the opportunity to prevent that. They didn't. The next year, a manager's job was literally riding on that final, and United defied all expectation and produced probably their best performance of the past 12 years to deny City a double and beat a City team that had Rodri in it, which was no mean feat at the time, given how long he'd gone without losing. But Rodri's come back in, and as he was on the losing side at Brighton, so it's. I mean, I don't like predictions anyway. I think they're rather pointless by and large, but it is a tricky one to call. It would be good to have a clearer picture as to the team news, because again, this quirk of United that they are playing very enterprising and watchable football without a striker, despite being a team crying out for a striker, and they're still struggling to score goals from open play. And you look at Sesko while he was on international duty with Slovenia, 2 starts, no goals, and there was that quote I think I saw where he said, I'm having to adapt, I'll need time. And this is exactly what they didn't need. They did not need a striker who the manager and the striker himself keeps on saying, I need time, he needs time. You're not going to get time at Man United. Rasmus Højlund barely had 2 years, and it was unfair on him. And this was my argument with Sesko. Don't go for someone who was born in the same year as Højlund and has a relatively similar record to him, and also his career path as well. So if Sesko was to start, it's almost, I imagine some United fans would be somewhat uneasy about that, because he's not really looked on it, albeit he came in late and there was a bit of ring rust there. But as I said, you don't get time at Manchester United, you'll be judged immediately. And I think he's had 6 games this season for club and country, and it's no goals.
It adds to the intrigue of it, though, doesn't it? If Mason Mount is injured and Sesko starts, because we've only seen him start against Grimsby. Yes, he has looked rusty in the other Premier League games, but there's an element of unpredictability there. And on the bright side, if he does find a way to score on Sunday, if he does start, there's no better place to score your first goal for the club, is there? So hopefully, if he does start, he can produce the goods. We'll leave it there. And Samuel, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Stephen.
And thanks to listeners as usual. Enjoy your weekend. We'll be back on Monday to review the game. Take care.